Good to see you back in the classroom. This time we're discussing how to get great sound in your home cinema. Now don't forget you're setting the cinema up for your use, so experiment and see what works best for you. While there are some general recommendations, you can't beat trial and error. Let's start by discussing where sound distortion comes from. You run into problems with your sound when you start getting standing waves, or standing sound waves. Without going into a lesson in physics, the problem with standing waves is that it causes sound distortion and variation at different points in the room. You can avoid standing waves through the right room dimensions, speaker position, seating position, and some management of sound reflection. Every room is different, so again, trial and error is critical. A room's three main axes, its length, its width and its height, can contribute to bass peaks and dips of up to 10 decibels throughout a room. This means the volume may sound twice as loud in some areas as opposed to others. This is especially true near walls and in corners. Certain room shapes are fundamentally bad. A cube is one of the worst shapes for a room. You'll also hear more standing wave distortion in rooms with two equal dimensions or rooms with dimensions that are multiples, for example 8 by 16 by 24. In general, the smaller the room, the more it will affect the bass response. Now this tends not to be an issue with classic films, but will be an issue with recent releases, especially action and superhero type films. A high slope ceiling tends to scatter those ceiling mode effects. Common types of wall construction such as plasterboard wall or wood panelling will absorb significant amounts of added bass reflections. Standing waves are always stronger next to walls, so if your chair or sofa has its back against a wall, moving it out and away from the wall should reduce some of that standing wave boominess. As a part of your trial and error adjustments, try moving your chair closer or farther away from your speakers, or away from a wall and closer to the centre of the room to get out of a standing wave hotspot. You can also look at strategies to manage reflection from the back wall. Sound reflection is an important element. The good about sound reflection is that it can make music and movie dialogue sound much fuller and louder. The bad is that reflection can distort sounds by making certain notes sound louder or cancelling out others. The result may be that sound effects, music and voices become vague or smeared. Worse still, you can end up with an echo, which is very distracting. Hard flat surfaces cause the most reflection, so mirrors, windows, wooden or vinyl floors, ceiling, walls and doors. The basic rule of thumb is that if you can see it, you can hear it. So a good way to identify your reflection points is to get a second person into the room, moving around and holding a mirror. The point at which you can see the speaker is a reflection point. Mark those spots because they're the things that we're going to want to manage when it comes to reflection. If your seat is less than a few metres from the back wall, this might need to be addressed too, whether through absorption or moving further away from that wall. The floor between you and your speakers can also be a source of reflected sound. If it isn't carpeted, try adding a rug. Flutter Echo is a ringing reverberation that remains after the direct sound has stopped. It blurs the fast musical tracks and can add an unpleasant harshness to the mid-range and treble. Probably the most common and immediately noticeable problem results from having parallel surfaces, so walls, floors and ceilings, with a hard finish that reflects sounds. This is best dealt with by applying sound absorption or diffusion between you and those reflection points. Rugs, carpet, curtains, acoustic ceiling panels and styrofoam wall panels can also all work to absorb sound and sound reflection. Reflection points can be treated by gluing a square of styrofoam at least 2 centimetres thick and about half a metre square. You don't have to treat every surface in your room. There are a few key spots which, if treated, will give you maximum sound improvement for your investment. Too much absorption makes the sound dead. An over-absorbed room can also make spoken dialogue sound unnaturally dry. At the other extreme, a room with painted plaster walls or ceiling, a lino, hardwood or concrete floor, and no sound-absorbing drapes or rugs would sound extremely bright, thin and echoey. Too many echoes can negatively affect movie dialogue, making it more difficult to understand. The other way to control sound reflection is diffusion. If you've tried absorptive materials and your movies still don't sound quite right, then diffusion or the scattering of sound might be the answer. The advantage of diffusion is that because the sound energy is scattered rather than absorbed, the energy isn't lost, thereby maintaining a more live sound in your room. Bookshelves filled with odd-shaped books on the side or at the back of the room can help break up or diffuse reflections, and these are objects that you can shift around to see what arrangements work best from a sound perspective. Speaker placement is something that you have a lot of control over. Slight alterations to the positioning of your speakers in the room can make dramatic improvements to the overall sound. Most rooms are not square. Speakers should be laid out so that they play along the length of the room. Avoid placing items between you and your speakers. You want a clean line of sight to them, and speakers generally sound best when they're at the level of your ears when you're listening. If you have a surround system, place your subwoofer at least 30 centimeters from a corner to prevent unnecessary reverberation and echo. If you mount your speakers on a desk or a shelf, place them on a layer of foam or a similarly absorptive material. This prevents reverberation from polluting the soundtrack. When starting to position your speakers, start with them flat up against the back wall, 1.5 to 2.5 meters apart, not tight in at all. With the speakers in this position, listen to a relatively detailed and familiar 30-second piece of music or soundtrack. The more familiar you are with the music, the better, as this will help you decide what sounds best. Then move each speaker out from the wall by a couple of centimeters and listen to the same part of the track. The sound will usually be slightly better. Keep repeating this process until the sound gets slightly worse. Then move the speakers back to their previous position. This is the correct distance away from the wall for your tastes. Now repeat exactly the same process with varying degrees of toe in until again you find the best position. You have now set your speakers up correctly for your room. Finally, be on the lookout for acoustics-savvy components such as powered subwoofers with built-in bass equalization and home theatre receivers with automatic speaker calibration. This can help digitally correct for room problems, making the whole process and setup quicker and easier. Now, turning our attention to setting up for classic films. Films that were made between 1904 and 1927, mono musical tracks were recorded and played from a disc for smaller cinemas who couldn't afford organists or orchestras. And again, these films may well have mono tracks attached to the DVD that you're playing it from. From around 1927, the soundtrack was recorded on the celluloid adjacent to the film image and remained in mono until 1949 when basic stereo was introduced. With the introduction of CinemaScope in 1953, a 4-track stereo sound was added, but this was for a relatively small number of films. The big change came in 1975 with the introduction of Dolby Stereo, then surround sound in 1985, and then Dolby Digital in 1992. Now this is important to remember because while older films may have been remastered, remember that the source soundtrack will have limitations and that expensive sound systems may not give you the improvements that you're looking for or may not be good value for money. So like I said, this is going to take a little bit of experimentation. Take a methodical approach, look at managing the reflection, look at managing absorption and diffraction to a certain extent, certainly look at your speakers and look at the technology as well. And with a number of different tweaks, you'll have the perfect setup for your home cinema. I hope you enjoy the experience.